On a cold winter morning on fatted January 1942, while newspaper boys in Tokyo shouted headlines of victory, and while housewives lined up at ration counters smiling with confidence that the empire was winning on all fronts, one man inside a steel-walled flagship hundreds of miles away from the homeland was not celebrating. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat inside his sea cabin aboard the mighty battleship Yamato, the greatest warship afloat, and pored over situation reports arriving from Malaya, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Guam, Wake, and Borneo. His pencil tapped the desk. His brow was furrowed. He was a gambler who knew that lucky streaks always turn. This script begins the moment Japan thinks it is invincible, the moment when the rising sun is at its brightest point, the moment before the fall. What the crowds in Tokyo did not know, what even many officers in the Imperial General Staff did not know, was that Yamamoto had been against the war in the first place. He had begged, he had argued, he had pleaded with the politicians and with the hot-headed generals of the army to not push the United States and Great Britain into a corner. He had said to Prince Konoe, "If war comes, in the first 6 months we will run wild like an octopus spreading tentacles everywhere. But after that I can promise nothing." And now it was exactly 1 month after Pearl Harbor, and just as he predicted, Japan was running wild, Singapore almost trapped. British battleship sunk, Philippines collapsing. Hong Kong in Japanese hands, the greatest naval ambush in history had just taken place in Hawaii. But Yamamoto was not satisfied. Pearl Harbor had not destroyed the American carriers, and Yamamoto understood something that almost no one else inside Tokyo understood. The Americans would not forgive. They would not forget. They would not slow down because of defeat. They would accelerate. He had lived in America. He had watched their industries. He had visited their universities. He had been naval attaché in Washington. He had smoked cigars with American admirals. He had played poker in American homes. He had seen Detroit's automobile factories. He had traveled by train across endless industrial cities.
He had seen the warehouses full of steel. He had told Japanese nationalists bluntly, "You do not know the Americans."
If we start this war, we must win very fast. We have only 18 months before they overwhelm us, and now the war had begun, and the 18-month hourglass had started. So just a few hours after, the newspapers in Tokyo were printing triumphant headlines in giant font sizes, Yamamoto calmly told his chief of staff Matomi Ugaki, "Prepare the second phase plan for the Pacific War. I want the plan finished by February. This is where everything begins." There was a massive argument inside Tokyo. The army wanted to expand infinitely. They wanted to push deeper into China, India, Siberia, anywhere. They did not care about logic. Their view was simple. As long as we are winning, keep expanding. Yamamoto saw the trap. He saw the cliff ahead. He wanted a decisive knockout blow, not endless expansion. He wanted one giant, spectacular strike that would frighten the United States, frighten Britain, frighten their public, frighten their politicians, and create a moment where the Japanese could offer peace. A generous peace, a respectable peace. In his mind, that was the only way Japan could survive. He looked at the map. 3 options existed. First option, attack the Soviet Union. But the army said no, because all land forces were tied up in China and Southeast Asia. Second option, attack Australia. Capture New Guinea, New Caledonia, Fiji, Samoa, then invade Australia itself. This idea was loved by officers in Tokyo. They even started preparing occupation plans for Australia and New Zealand. But to Yamamoto, this was foolish. Too slow, too exhausting, too expensive. It still would not force the Americans to negotiate. Third option, the one Yamamoto believed in the most, strike into the Indian Ocean, crush the British Eastern Fleet, seize Ceylon, then connect with the Germans advancing into the Caucasus, join armies and navies in the Middle East, capture the oil permanently, then negotiate peace from a position of overwhelming dominance. But the army refused that too. So Yamamoto produced a fourth option, the most audacious plan of all. A trap at Midway. Destroy the American carriers in a decisive single battle. Occupy Midway, then Alaska, then threaten Hawaii, then threaten the American West Coast. Then force Roosevelt to negotiate. He wanted peace through terror. Peace through shock. The MI plan, Midway, became his masterpiece. Tokyo reluctantly approved it, but then something happened that shocked Japan to its core. more than anything that had happened in December. Doolittle's Raid, tiny B-25 bombers, launched from the deck of an American aircraft carrier, appeared over Tokyo. It was not militarily significant, but psychologically, it was a detonating bomb in the Japanese brain. Japan is not safe. America can hit our capital. America is not defeated. America has only started, and this moment changed everything. Singapore fell. Bataan fell. Corregidor fell. Hong Kong was gone. Manila gone. Darwin bombed. But Pearl Harbor had not eliminated the carriers. America was retaliating. Tokyo panicked, and panic always leads to emotional decisions. Midway was green-lighted. Without hesitation, the Japanese moved south. They took Rabaul. They bombed New Guinea. They built airfields. They prepared to seal off Australia. The Australians were terrified. General Douglas MacArthur was in Australia, now, exiled from the Philippines, and he realized if the Japanese finished their buildup in New Guinea, nothing would stop them from taking northern Australia. Then the Battle of the Coral Sea happened, the first carrier versus carrier battle in history, where fleets never saw each other visually. The Japanese were blocked. Port Moresby was saved. Tulagi was taken by Japanese seaplane forces. Guadalcanal. At this point, nobody in the world even cared about that name. It was just another green island, just a little dot on the map. Not important, but everything in the Pacific. War would transform because of that. The Americans still did not know they were about to fight a 6-month battle on that island. A meat grinder, a nightmare. But before Guadalcanal, one more catastrophe came. Midway, June 1942. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Lotarakaji Kaga Soryu Hiryu Yamamoto's entire vision exploded in a single day. The Japanese high command hid the truth even from their own field commanders. They pretended they had won. Yamamoto knew the truth. Japan had lost the decisive duel. Japan would never again mount a major offensive with such power. Now the South Pacific would become a desperate holding line. Japan still wanted to cut Australia off. They still wanted to build that airfield on Guadalcanal to strike Australia. Pioneers, Japanese construction units, arrived. They cleared grass. They burned land. They moved equipment. They began building runways. American intelligence saw the clues. June 25th. Grass burned. July 1st. Tent set up. July 4th. Japanese pioneer units, the 11th and 13th, would arrive. Admiral Nimitz read the intercepted message. He called Admiral Turner. "This is where you are going." The Solomons. Guadalcanal. America would strike first. America had no amphibious doctrine, no experience, no rehearsal, no spare troops, no reserve. But there was no choice. Admiral King refused any delay. Japan must be stopped now, before Australia was isolated. Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, commander of carriers, and was still traumatized by losing Lexington at Coral Sea and Yorktown at Midway. He said he would only cover the Marines for 2 days and then leave because he refused to risk more carriers. The commanders were horrified. The Marines had no way to hold the island alone, but the decision had been made. No way back. The American Marines would invade Guadalcanal. The Japanese had no idea. The stage was set. The most savage jungle struggle of the entire Pacific War was about to begin. Yamamoto was trapped between fate and fear, and history had begun to turn. The Marines who boarded the transports in July had no idea that they were about to enter a place that most of the world could not even find on a map. Guadalcanal was not a famous island. It was not Singapore. It was not Manila. It was not Pearl Harbor. It was just a name in the Solomon Island chain near Tulagi, near endless green jungle and malaria-infested swamps, a place of coconuts and humidity and rivers that looked brown and quiet from aerial reconnaissance photos, but which concealed snakes, insects, crocodiles, and bacteria thicker than any Western doctor had ever imagined. No one thought it would become the most decisive ground of the Pacific War's turning point. It was simply the first place where the Americans arrived before the Japanese finished an airstrip. The Marines were not ready. They had trained for amphibious operations only on paper. They had never done an invasion of a defended beach. They did not even know how to load a transport correctly. The ships originally sat in Auckland with modern docks, but the Navy, in a hurry, ordered them moved to Noumea, a port without proper unloading facilities, and it was there, In disorganized conditions, that equipment was loaded and stacked in any available space. Ammunition next to blankets, rifle oil next to crates of tinned peaches. Everything in wrong order. When the Marines landed, they would search like children in a messy storeroom, just to find what they needed. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, the amphibious commander, was ordered to take the Marines ashore. Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher was ordered to protect the amphibious operation with his carriers. But Fletcher, burned by Coral Sea and Midway, refused to risk his carriers longer than 2 days. He told the commanders in the Saratoga cabin in late July, "I'm staying 48 hours, then I'm leaving." This meant the Marines would be abandoned on an island, surrounded by Japanese air bases, without air. Cover after just 2 days, everyone in the room knew how insane that sounded. No reserve troops were waiting behind, no second wave, no backup. General Alexander A. Vandegrift, commander of the 1st Marine Division, listened silently. He understood that he was being given the most brutal order a general can ever receive. Take an island and hold it, without any guarantee of support, without even knowing if resupply will come, while the enemy has nearby airfields, battleships, cruisers, submarines, and thousands of aircraft at Rabaul. The Americans were going in blind. The Japanese, meanwhile, believed they were in control of the region. The airfield on Guadalcanal, the Japanese called it Lunga, was nearly finished. The dirt runway was packed. Oil drums were lined up. Palms had been cleared. Equipment was staged. Soon Zero fighters would land there and use it as a stepping stone to northern Australia. If Japan finished that runway, northern Australia could be bombed every day, supply lines destroyed, and the continent isolated. Every mile of jungle on that island was connected to the life or death of Australia. This is the reason Guadalcanal matters. Not because the island is big. Not because the island is rich, but because the Japanese runway on that island would strangle Australia. And if Australia falls, America loses its forward base in the South Pacific. This is why King said no delay. This is why Nimitz gave the direct order, "We invade now, ready or not," because waiting would cost the entire continent. August 7th, 1942, men at dawn, as the sky glowed orange over the Solomon Sea, the largest amphibious operation the United States had ever attempted launched against Tulagi and Guadalcanal. It was the first American offensive of the Pacific War. It was the moment when the United States, after months of losing territory, finally attacked. The Japanese on Guadalcanal were caught completely off guard. They believed the Americans were on the defensive. They did not imagine U.S. Marines would storm the beach. When the Marines reached the beach at Lunga Point, they expected machine gun fire that would mow them down, but nothing came. The Japanese construction workers fled into the jungle. The Marines captured the partly finished airfield by noon. No American historian has ever ignored the irony of this moment. One of the most important objectives. In the war, captured basically without firing a shot, it should have been easy, but in war, nothing stays easy. As soon as the Japanese realized the airfield was taken, they reacted with machine-like speed. Naval units were dispatched from Truk. Cruiser squadrons turned south. Airstrikes launched from Rabaul. Submarines deployed like wolves. The Japanese reaction was instinctive and violent. Yamamoto, though shocked by Midway, had still retained enough of the fleet to punch with lethal force. The Japanese night fighting ability with their long lance torpedoes was unmatched anywhere in the world. The Americans were still learning, still bleeding, still improvising. Fletcher left with his carriers after 2 days, exactly as he said he would. The Marines looked up at the empty sky. The carriers were gone. They had no air cover. Every Japanese bomber coming from Rabaul would be free to attack. The Marines dug foxholes around the strip, soon renamed Henderson Field, after Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at Midway. The Americans had no heavy artillery inland yet. Ammunition was scattered in crates somewhere in the jungle. Medical supplies were incomplete. Rations were insufficient. Mosquitoes already swarmed. It was as if fate was testing their will from the first hour after the carriers disappeared over the horizon. That night, the Japanese cruisers under Admiral Gunichi Mikawa struck at Savo Island, and in a matter of minutes destroyed a large Allied screening force. 4 Allied heavy cruisers were sunk. It was one of the worst defeats in U.S. naval history. The sea around Savo was lit by burning oil. It was a catastrophe, and the Marines on the beach had no idea. In the morning, they realized the transports had left early, panicked by the Savo disaster, leaving thousands of tons of supplies still on their decks. Most of the supplies they needed to survive were not on the island. They were now alone, surrounded, undersupplied, and the Japanese now understood exactly where to strike. Guadalcanal turned into a nightmare. Night after night, Japanese destroyers came roaring through what the Americans began to call Iron Bottom Sound, delivering troops and shelling the Marines. The Japanese called their destroyer runs the Tokyo Express. It became a rhythm, the nightly thunder of naval guns, the deep booming of shells hitting jungle, Marines diving into holes as shrapnel shredded palm trees, then silence, then the growl of engines, then more steel rain. The runway was bombed by day. Craters were filled with shovels by hand. Marines defended the line in soaked clothing. Guadalcanal was alive with disease, malaria, dysentery, dengue, each one capable of killing a man faster than a bullet. The Japanese believed in night attack as a sacred tactical principle. They attacked again and again at Alligator Creek, at the Tenaroo, at Edson's Ridge in August. In September, in October, each time they believed they could push the Americans into the sea, the Japanese army officers were shocked to discover the Marines did not run. This was the first time Japanese infantry collided with American infantry in a prolonged ground campaign, and the image the Japanese had of Americans, soft, weak, comfortable, lazy, was shattered. American machine guns on Edson's Ridge did not break. American lines did not bend. Yamamoto had once said Americans were soft, but he had also said, once provoked, their anger becomes an unstoppable hurricane. Now on Guadalcanal, that hurricane was beginning. Battleships like Congo and Haruna shelled Henderson Field with 14-inch guns. Shells the size of telephone poles slammed into the American position. The runway was torn apart, but each morning Marines would crawl out, rebuild, fill craters, pull wrecked planes to the side, and the few Wildcat fighters that could still fly would take off to intercept the next wave. The U.S. Navy and Japanese Navy fought 7 major naval engagements around the island. The sea glowed at night from burning ships. The water was black with oil. The number of vessels sunk created a graveyard, hence the name Iron Bottom Sound. The Japanese Navy never again fought another long-sustained campaign like this. They were burning fuel faster than they could replace it. Their elite aviators were dying. Their destroyer crews were exhausted. American factories were producing replacement aircraft, faster than Japan could even train pilots. Guadalcanal became the pressure chamber that crushed the Japanese war machine into exhaustion. By February 1943, the Japanese evacuated what remained of their forces. They had lost thousands of men. They had lost the initiative. They had lost the ability to strike Australia. And most importantly, they had lost time. The clock Yamamoto feared, the 18-month clock, reached its own limit. Japan could never again seize the initiative. The octopus was no longer spreading. It was recoiling, its tentacles cut, its strength bleeding. Guadalcanal was not the biggest battle in numbers, but Guadalcanal was the turning point, because it was the first major Allied offensive that succeeded, because it was the moment when the United States proved it could land, hold, survive, supply, reinforce, and kill on jungle ground thousands of miles from home. From this moment forward, the war direction changed. Japan would retreat, America would advance island by island, atoll by atoll, runway by runway, and everything that Yamamoto predicted in 1940 came true. He had said Japan must win in 18 months and or never. Win Midway plus Guadalcanal, Kanchar. The expiration of Japan's window. The empire had reached its limit. Its gamble had failed. And the rest of the war was simply the slow crushing process of American industry, American logistics, American air power, American shipyards, and American determination rolling across the Pacific. When news of Guadalcanal's loss reached Japan, the shock was deep, but the government hid the full scale. They continued to speak of glorious victories. but the officers in Combined Fleet Headquarters understood. The fuel shortage grew. The pilot training pipeline collapsed. Veteran air groups died. The aircraft carriers were now shells without experienced aviators. The Navy that once dominated the Pacific was now in defensive posture. Yamamoto, who had never wanted the war, would not live to see the end. His transport bomber was shot down over Bougainville in April 1943 by American P-38 fighters using radio intercept intelligence. He was killed by the very code-breaking system that had guided the Americans to Guadalcanal in the first place. The war he never wanted consumed him. The Japanese Empire would surrender in 1945, not a negotiation but unconditionally, exactly the opposite of Yamamoto's plan. But the moment the outcome of the war became inevitable was not Hiroshima. It was not Iwo Jima. It was not even Midway. It was Guadalcanal. Because Guadalcanal proved that Japan no longer had the momentum, and that America had the will to fight to the last inch. That island of jungles and mosquitoes, of 19-year-old Marines digging in mud under artillery fire, became the place where the war's axis silently tilted. From that island, the war changed direction forever.